Okay, let's talk about something that can happen to anyone. You make a deal, you sign a contract, everything seems solid. But then something totally out of your control happens, and carrying out that deal becomes, well, impossible. What happens then? That's where we're digging into today, the legal idea known as the doctrine of frustration. I mean, really think about it. Imagine you've booked a venue for a massive event. You've signed on the dotted line, but the night before, a freak flood just washes the whole place away. You can't hold the event, and the owner obviously can't provide the venue. So is the contract still good? Is anyone on the hook for the money? This is exactly the kind of mess the law needs to sort out. And the solution, the answer to that mess, is this really powerful concept, the doctrine of frustration. You can think of it as a kind of legal escape hatch. It basically says that if some completely unexpected event, and this is key, through no fault of either person, completely changes the game, the contract is just over. It's automatically terminated and both sides are released from their promises. To really wrap our heads around this, we're going to break it down. So, wrist up, let's look at the most straightforward kind of frustration. What happens when the very thing the contract is about just physically disappears? Now, this idea wasn't just pulled out of thin air. It was really cemented way back in the 19th century in England, with a famous case involving a music hall, a concert promoter, and a pretty disastrous fire. So here's how it went down. A guy named Taylor signs a contract to rent Mr. Caldwell's music hall for a series of 4 huge concerts. The deal is done. But then, just 6 days before the very first show, the entire hall burns to the ground in an accidental fire. Poof, gone. No hall, no concerts. So naturally, Taylor sues Caldwell for breach of contract because he couldn't provide the venue they agreed on. And the court's decision here was totally groundbreaking. They said, nope, the contract is off. And why? Because, they argued, there was an implied condition in the contract. It was as if there was an unwritten rule that the music hall had to continue to exist for the deal to work. Since it was destroyed, and it wasn't anyone's fault, both of them were excused. The contract was officially frustrated. Okay, so a building burning down, that's a pretty clear-cut case of physical impossibility. But what happens when you can technically still perform your side of the bargain, but the entire reason you made the deal in the first place has just vanished into thin air? This is where the whole doctrine gets a lot more subtle. The thing you contracted for is still there, but the event that gave the contract all of its meaning, that's gone. This is what lawyers call frustration of purpose. And you can see this perfectly in 2 different cases from the exact same year, both about the canceled coronation events for King Edward VII. In the first one, Krell versus Henry, a guy rented a flat for the specific, single purpose of watching the king's coronation procession from the window. When the king got sick and the procession was canceled, the court said the contract was frustrated. Why? Because its entire foundation was gone. But contrast that with Herne Bay versus Hutton. In that case, a boat was hired for 2 things: to watch a naval review and to take a cruise around the fleet. The review was canceled, but the fleet was still there to be seen. So the court ruled this contract was not frustrated because a big part of its purpose was still intact. And that comparison really lays it all out, doesn't it? The test is this. Was the canceled event the absolute foundational reason for the contract, the thing both people knew was the whole point? Or was there still some other purpose, some other value left in the deal? That's the crucial difference. Right, so those early cases set the stage for English common law. But that's not how it works everywhere. So let's shift gears and look at India, which actually has a specific law that covers this whole situation. See, in India, this whole idea isn't just something based on old court decisions. It's written right into the law books. Section 56 of the Indian Contract Act says very clearly that a contract becomes void if its performance becomes impossible or illegal after the deal is made. And the landmark case that really defined how Section 56 works is one called Satyabrata Ghose. What happened was a company had a contract to develop a bunch of land and sell a plot to a buyer. But then, smack in the middle of World War II, the government requisitioned the land for military purposes. Suddenly, developing it became impossible. So when this case eventually got to the Supreme Court of India, they made a really important distinction. They said, look, Section 56 isn't just about trying to guess what was implied in the contract, like in those old English cases. Nope, it's a positive rule of law. It just applies automatically as soon as performance becomes impossible. So what's the big takeaway here? It means the Indian approach is actually broader and way more direct. It's not about what the parties might have been thinking. It's a straight-up statutory command. If performance becomes impossible, the contract is void. End of story. But, and this is a big but, this doctrine is not some get-out-of-jail-free card you can play anytime a contract gets difficult. The courts have set up some very strict tests for when you can actually use it. So if you want to claim frustration, you've got to pass these 3 tests. First, the crazy event has to happen after you've already signed the contract. Second, it has to be a genuine shocker, something nobody could have reasonably predicted or controlled. And third, the impact has to be absolutely devastating, making the contract truly impossible or something radically different from what you agreed to. And that brings us to what frustration is not. You can't cause the problem yourself and then try to claim the contract as frustrated. If the event was something you should have seen coming, you're out of luck. And this is really important. If your contract already has a clause for this kind of situation, like a force majeure clause, then that's what you follow. The contract itself has the answer. And really, here's the absolute bottom line, especially for business. Just because your deal becomes a bad one, or way more expensive, or just a lot harder to pull off, that is not frustration. The law expects you to hold up your end of the bargain even if it starts to hurt your bottom line. The bar for frustration is set incredibly high. It has to be true impossibility, not just a tough day at the office. And all of this leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. The whole point of a contract is to create certainty. But this doctrine of frustration is there to inject fairness when the world throws a curveball that makes that certainty impossible. So, in our world that's always changing, where do you think that line should be drawn? Thanks for joining this explainer.